Computer. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Greetings, Earth and Space Explorers. Welcome to Doc Waller's Earth and Space Report for Friday, August 29, 2025. I'm your host, Bill Waller, an astronomer, science educator, and communicator coming to you on an overcast summer evening here at the Schoodic Education and Research Institute, which is part of Acadia National Park in Mid-Coast, Maine. These Earth and Space reports are intended to engage, inform, and inspire people like you who are curious about Earth as a planet and who care about our life-sustaining biosphere and who wonder about the greater cosmos and all that it has engendered throughout space and time. Video recordings of these reports are archived on the Earth and Space Reports YouTube channel. They are also in regular rotation on the 1623 Studios Community Access Cable Television channel. I'm grateful for the continuing interest and support shown by Rockport educators and students, Cape Ann cultural colleagues, cohorts of the Gloucester Area Astronomy Club, yay, myriad Earth and space scientists, educators, and communicators, far-flung friends, family, and other curious folk. Thank you for your active participation and encouragements. This evening, I am beyond thrilled to be hosting my son, Dr. Julian Waller, who will speak on space settlements and their governance. Julian is a professorial lecturer in political science at George Washington University and a research analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses. That's not the navel in the middle of your belly. His research portfolio includes scholarship on the politics and governance models of authoritarian regimes, illiberal ideological dynamics in Europe, Eurasia, and North America, and political military affairs in post-Soviet Eurasia. He is co-author of the book Autocrats Can't Always Get What They Want: Institutions and Autonomy Under Authoritarianism, and his research has been published in policy and peer-reviewed journals, including Foreign Affairs, American Affairs, Political Studies Review, Problems of Post-Communism, Communist and Post-Communist Studies, the Journal of Advanced Military Studies, the Journal of Illiberalism Studies, the International Journal of Constitutional Law, the Journal of International Affairs, and Survival. In his presentation this evening, Julian poses the provocative question, when we achieve permanent settlement on the Moon and Mars, how will residents be governed? This question has grown increasingly pertinent as a variety of state and corporate actors have been making plans to develop and occupy bases on the Moon, Mars, and sundry asteroids. The unique challenges of human habitation on these alien worlds have prompted Julian to consider what societies have done in the past here on Earth as guides for predicting what might take hold off planet. So let's get going. The Zoom platform is all yours, Jules.
All right. Well, many thanks to Dr. Waller for having me on this wonderful program. Hello from DC, where it is unusually nice weather, given the normally quite swampy August that we have regularly. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm excited to provide a provocation, something a little bit different than I think the standard fare of Earth and space science, science education. We're going to move into the realm of political science, and we're going to move into the realm of what we might call spicier or more controversial topics about questions of governance, about democracy, and from my perspective, of authoritarianism in the beyond Earth sort of ecosystem. So I have a set of slides I'm going to run through. They're relatively informal. My goal is to present to you a general sort of framework, an idea of how to think through some of these issues. I look forward to the Q&A as well. So without further ado, I'm going to share presentation. Let me know if everyone can see it. All good? All right, fantastic. Okay, so we have a long, clunky title to start us out. Governance in Long-Term Space Settlements, a question of regime. My thanks again to my father, for the wonderful introduction and far too many journals that I've written in. That was very kind. This is the first time I'm presenting this material, so again, I'm going to try to be relatively conversational, relatively informal, and hopefully that will provide points of interest to talk about later on as we get going. So, to give you my very, very brief background. I have a PhD in political science. My field of research is comparative politics. Comparative politics is the study of basically all non-American states, their internal domestic politics rather than their foreign policy, which we usually term international affairs or international relations. My specializations are in the politics of authoritarian rule, autocratization, democratization, as well as a regional aspect in Russian and post-Soviet politics, ideological liberalism, and political military studies. I'll talk about that in just a second. My primary affiliation is at the Center for Naval Analyses. It's called the CNA Corporation, which is a federally funded research and development center that works for the Department of Defense and a variety of other entities related to national security issues. And I work on their dedicated Russia studies program, doing what we call adversary analytics. So studying the adversary, understanding the adversary, and in my case, understanding other political systems that are quite distinct from our own. Um, in addition, I teach at George Washington University as a professorial lecturer, which is GW's fancy term for an adjunct professor. This semester, I am teaching a class called Dictators in Europe and Russia, which is going to be the source of a book that I'm currently drafting right now on the evolution of non-democracy, the evolution of authoritarian regimes throughout history. And finally, I'm also have a non-resident fellow appointment. My remarks today are not related to my work at CNA. They do not represent the opinions of the US government, the Department of Defense, or anything of that nature. My affiliation here is as a professor at George Washington University and an academic scholar of authoritarianism and governance models proper. Uh, this is derived in part from ongoing research agendas that encompass a variety of issues, scholarly questions of governance and non-democracy, as well as questions in Russian politics as well, which we could talk about at the end if you're inclined, or otherwise just shoot me an email. And I will note as sort of a fun fact is that I am also on the Russian sanctions list. And I was sanctioned a couple of years ago, and so I can't enter Russia anymore for the time being. They probably would not like my research very much as well. So that's sort of my general background, but I wanted to introduce myself again, having a profile somewhat distinct from, I think, a variety of the Earth and space scientists and educators that appear on this fantastic program. So today I'm going to talk about a few things. We are going to talk about the world's favorite billionaire as sort of our nice framing device, Mr. Elon Musk. We're going to then discuss questions of governance and concepts, how we think about them, and we're going to bring them into the space ecosystem and the governance problem set as we get closer and closer towards the plausibility of permanent long-term human settlements on Mars, on the moon, and further afield. And then I'm going to provide a set of plausible governance models, which I think should provide some interesting food for thought, and then we'll have a discussion after that. But that is the plan for the rest of the presentation. First, let me reintroduce you to Mr. Elon Musk, who runs, among many things, the SpaceX company, which has a explicit Mars colonization program. We're very, very far from the world of science fiction now. This is actually being put in place and implemented by SpaceX. It has NASA involvement as well. NASA is also interested in manned settlement beyond Earth as well. SpaceX's Mars colonization program can be summarized as the planned objective is to send humans to live on Mars. And to quote it, the plan is to establish a self-sustaining, large-scale settlement and directly democratic, self-governing colony, right? So it's not simply a settlement that's directly taking mission orders from Starbase in Texas. It is, in fact, going to be self-governing. That is what they say. In the Starlink program's terms of service, when you agree as an individual subscriber to get a Starlink, you agree in the contract that the parties recognize Mars as a free planet and that no Earth-based government has authority or sovereignty over Martian activities. Elon has also stated on Twitter, on X, that Mars colonies will be governed through direct democracy. He says direct democracy by the people, laws must be short, automatic expiration of rules, any rule can be removed by the people to overcome inertia, freedom. This is sort of a libertarian conception of society, which of course fits quite well with Musk's broader ideological leanings. But anyway, this is a very, very real program, and this is uh, uh, pushed forward by one of the most totally agential men on Earth right now with the resources to at least potentially make it happen. So we need to take it very seriously, and we should think about what that means. And we're going to focus on this direct democracy or this democracy component because there's actually a lot more interesting things here than we might expect. So that's our framing device. And here is a picture I pulled from a SpaceX fan club online. This is from 2021, showing the timeline of the road to Mars. Now, according to this 2021 timeline, we are in the red circle where there already should be Mars cargo being launched. As you can see, things are slightly delayed. So I poked around and I found a 2025 update. This one seems a little bit more realistic, given time delays. We are now at the left-hand red circle, 2025 into 2026, where they're just beginning sort of preparations. But according to SpaceX, by the early 2030s, we are going to be having habitat construction and roads and pads are going to be built on Mars by 2033. The claim is that it will increase independence from Earth and that it will move towards self-sufficiency. Again, this is sort of our justification and motivation for thinking about questions of governance, because if this comes to pass, there will very, very quickly be permanent settlers on Mars and then later on the moon as well. So the real question we want to ask is, can we have direct democracy on Mars? Is that even possible? Now, in order to answer this question, we have to do three things. It requires us first to understand what we mean by democracy, as well as other governance models. That's step one, and sort of our sort of poli-sci 101 here. For some of you, this will be very, very familiar and obvious, but it's sort of the necessary first step. Second, we have to understand the unique environment of permanent beyond Earth settlements in the medium term. Let's push that out approximately to 2090. So we're not in the realm of transporters and high science fiction. We still have the constraints of space, the constraints of even advanced technology, but at least we can sort of move forward on that count, right? So we want to look at that timeline. We're not in the realm of Star Trek quite yet. And third, to answer the question, or at least try to answer the question, we need to use the empirical data that we have, which in this case is going to be using historical analogy and patterns of real world, actual human governance to make tentative assessments about plausible models of governance for, again, long-term permanent space settlement. Our methodological toolkit is going to be political and other social sciences, organizational theory, organizational studies, as well as history. So that's sort of where we're going. So the question, I won't bury the lead, can we have direct democracy on Mars? My answer is probably not. That's very unlikely. This is a screenshot from Starship Troopers, a science fiction movie from the 1990s, which is very notable for its non-democratic cast. And I will argue that non-democracy is simply highly more likely, relatively speaking, in these settlement entities. And I'll explain why. The source material that I'm drawing from is an article that I wrote a year ago in the Journal of Advanced Military Studies, which is an academic peer-reviewed journal that is published by Marine Corps University Press. And the Marine Corps is very interested in questions of space governance and the militarization of space. And they had a call for papers on this exact question about weaponry in space, about governance in space, about settlement in space, and about geostrategy in space. So I thought I would bring to bear some of my own resources on the political science side, the study of comparative authoritarian regimes and the study of governance models and of democracy as well, to sort of get at this. And you're welcome to read the paper whenever you like. I can point you the way. But that's sort of where we're coming from here. So first, I will touch on a few basic governance concepts just to square us away in terms of terminology and what we're talking about, and sort of why there's a reason why throwing the democracy term around is actually a problem for us. And so we'll get to that first. So first we have to understand the unit of analysis. The unit of analysis here is political regime, which we usually use to colloquially describe the government of a country, the government of a state, right? A state in world politics. We can take from a fairly influential definition by a political scientist writing in the 1970s. Political regime is an ensemble of patterns that determines the method of access to the principal public offices, the characteristics of the actors admitted or excluded, the strategies those actors may use to gain access, and very importantly, the rules that are followed in making publicly binding decisions. It's a fancy way of saying who rules, why, and how, right? And who chooses the rulers, if the rulers are chosen at all. The key point is that while we normally use political regime to describe a state, right, a country, any large collection of humans that can make sovereign, self-governing decisions that involve coercion, state-like coercion, over distribution of resources, allocations of material, and also can tell people what to do, right? You know, states force you to pay taxes, for example. States force you to register for the draft. States build the roads that you drive on and all these sorts of things. They regulate most aspects of your lives. These are regimes. These are political regimes. And what we're going to argue is that a long-term permanent settlement colony on the Mars or Moon, sufficiently distant from Earth, is going to end up having political regime-like attributes. And that's why we can make this sort of conceptual movement and have it travel. Okay, so given that, there are two major, sorry, excuse me, and one final point is that there are two basic forms of regime: democracy and authoritarianism. We can think of these kind of in a binary. There are democracies, and there's sort of two different ways to think about democracy, and then there's everything else, which are authoritarian regimes, which are highly diverse in their origins, operations, and activities. So first, we'll touch on democracy. Democracy comes in two flavors. The flavor that we're most familiar with now is what we can call electoral democracy. Someone might call it liberal democracy, which is a political system in which the apex decision-making officials, so your president, your Congress, and so on, your prime minister, are chosen through regular, competitive, multi-party elections under broad suffrage, in which outcomes are uncertain, right? So there's not a certainty in terms of who is going to ultimately be elected. The United States today, the UK, France are sort of classic examples of this. This is what we usually mean when we talk about it worldwide. And we can compare this to this direct democracy idea, which Musk directly refers to in SpaceX governing documents refer to. Now, direct democracy is what we could also call classical democracy, the Athenian democracy, which is very different, in fact. That's a political system in which all decision making is made up by the full body politic and assembly, right? So you don't elect representatives to rule over you to make political decisions, and you have oversight checking mechanisms through elections. Instead, you as a body make those decisions. So Athens is, of course, the primary example, which inspired the founders here in the United States and elsewhere. But also New England town meeting is a form of direct democracy. So the town that I grew up in still holds town meeting, and there is direct democracy in terms of little sleepy Rockport, and this exists in places. A few countries have some variation on this. So Switzerland has sort of a plebiscitary form for major governing decisions requiring citizen input. That's a little bit of a complicated case, but otherwise, direct democracy is not really what we see on Earth today. The vast majority of democracies are electoral, and that's sort of the standard. That's what we usually mean when we talk about democracy. Okay, so but let's keep that in our mind. And you'll notice that electoral democracy has this sort of competitive nature in it, right? There's going to be a clash of interests, and it's going to come through these regular elections where there's competition, where people are opposing each other, right? And in direct democracy, of course, the same way. If you've ever been to a school board meeting where people are talking at the school board and they're raising their voices and they're saying this is crazy and insane, you can get an idea of what direct democracy can be like over sort of especially difficult issues for the public. Okay, put that on one side of things. Then we have the rest of the world, which falls under our category of authoritarianism, authoritarian regimes. I've selected some nice pictures for this one. Uh, Authoritarian regimes come in many flavors, many sizes. There's far more institutional diversity in their organizational patterns, in who is their leader. What is it? One person? Is it a collection of people? How is it structured? How is the hierarchy maintained? How are decisions taken, and so on, as well as their own forms of legitimacy. Very quickly, we can think of authoritarian regimes ranging from absolute monarchies to military juntas to theocracies to communist party states to personalist dictatorships to authoritarian regimes that mimic democracies themselves. Well, these are called electoral authoritarian regimes. Examples right now would be sort of Hungary or Turkey are sort of key examples. They have the workings, the constitutional workings of a democracy, but they don't have the internal content. And all of these regimes, which are quite diverse, and they really act differently. They have different degrees of stability. Some last much longer than others. Some are more economically successful than others, and so on. Not all dictatorships are alike. But they all share this lack of accountability at the apex, at the political decision-making level, to popular oversight via competitive elections. That's not how leaders are chosen, and that's not how they're constrained. So insofar as there is constraint on a leader, it's coming from different institutions, different sets of elites. It's not coming from the population, and it's not coming through these mechanisms. Uh, so that's our basic conceptual reference point. Here's a map. If you've never seen one of these big democracy maps, where they get colored in various ways, and all the coding metrics are different for every single study and every single index that compiles. I picked one that was relatively simple. The blue is democracy. The very two shades of red are varying degrees of closure in non-democracy and authoritarian regimes. But this is the world we live in today, and these are the governance patterns that we have that are empirical, that we can see, that exist in human society, right? Okay, so that's step one. That's getting our bearings on how are humans governed and the variations thereof. Okay, step two, the space governance problem set. Very simply, the existing governance architecture in space is essentially theoretical. It's based on a United Nations treaty from the 1960s, some assumptions about international law, especially the law of the sea in questions of international waters. These aspects, this is sort of the legal governance architecture that exists in a vacuum of actual permanent settlement, suggests that space is going to be freely explored and used by all nations. Countries are supposedly not allowed to claim sovereignty over outer space or over celestial bodies, that space is the, quote, province of all mankind. And all of this is, again, essentially theoretical from the perspective of settlement, because we haven't had it yet. And it does not envision corporate actors like SpaceX driving colonization. And it certainly doesn't expect corporate actors to say, we are building self-sustaining, self-governing, sovereign entities on Mars, on the moon, that will be separate as well. So it's simply a problem to which there is no existing solution, right? We don't have a set of guidance or a set of agreed upon instructions on how this would work. It does not solve the problem of governance. It doesn't even prescribe solutions per se, right? So this is sort of our existing background, which is again one reason why the question is so interesting. And the thing is, we can start bringing in our historical analogies because permanent settlement in space is going to be more state-like, much more state-like than what we have done in space so far, which is temporary crewed missions and unmanned space architecture, right? From satellites to probes and so on and so forth. In general, it's a very, very different beast. And the major exception in terms of permanency is the International Space Station, right? Or which had relatively more permanent settlement, but that permanent settlement wasn't permanent at all. It's just a period of time before going in and out and in and out. based on a binational or multinational agreement over that particular instrument. That's very different from permanent settlement in which you're not going to come back. You're there. We usually don't talk about political regime when we talk about organizations or corporations or missions, right? And there's a reason for it, because they're not sovereign. They don't, in fact, control your life in all aspects. The idea of corporate governance gets there to some degree, but it's still quite distinct. But colonial settlement is inherently unusual. There's a reason why we might think it's more state-like, it's more regime-like. The distance, first, from the sending entity, be it SpaceX, be it NASA, be it the European Space Agency or the Japanese Space Agency or what have you, the distance is so far and so great for the foreseeable future that it's going to require local decision-making authority on the ground. So who decides? And who chooses who decides? And why should other settlers listen to that person who is going to make those decisions? These are the real questions. Furthermore, permanent space settlement is going to be setting territorial bounds, and the settlement entity is going to have a monopoly on the coercion, the application of law, administration, checks on violence, law breaking within these settlements over time, right? Again, we're talking about permanent human communities. And finally, the population never clocks out from this kind of an organization. It can't go home, right? You might be governed for 8 hours when you go to work by an organization, but you're not governed 24/7. You are governed by the United States of America 24/7, right? The polity, the political regime, with all these attributes. When you are a settler on Mars, who is going to be there for the rest of his or her life, uh, it's going to matter quite a bit who has authority and under what sort of legitimating terms and structures that authority is derived. And as populations in space settlement communities go from tens of people to hundreds and thousands of people, it's going to force these governance considerations directly. They won't be able to be ignored. All right. So just to identify some of these key extra problems that we see and the uniqueness of the ecosystem, right? Which again adds to this issue of how is governance going to work, is that first, long-term settlement is permanent, right? You can't reasonably go back. There's no return trip right now, given the technology, given the investment so far. Eventually, yes, but we can't assume that, especially not in the first generations of settlement. Second, long-term space settlement is in a perpetually hostile environment, right? You cannot exit. You will die. You have to live within the environment. You have to live within the confines, which means leaving the immediate community is practically impossible. Again, for the time being. Long-term space settlement in these hostile environments, in these extreme environments, it requires constant coordination across all members of the community. You cannot have aggrieved dissension from the objectives of the community, from the objectives of the mission, right? Everyone has to be oriented towards the same goal. Otherwise, you're going to have potentially disastrous consequences. And related to that, long-term space settlement requires systems to constantly work, right? Technological systems, equipment systems, negligence, failure, or shirking will kill everyone, potentially, right? So these are very, very real threats, and they will be felt very acutely by the settlers. And finally, as I noted before, long-term space settlement requires day-to-day decision making, right? Again, you can't wait for orders from Houston or orders from Starbase for every little decision that's happening on the colony. That's not practical. It's not possible. It won't work given communication barriers. It also won't work because information will be insufficient for decision makers to be off-site. Decision makers will have to be on site. Now, there's a strong difference. You can, in fact, run temporary missions, temporary periods of time and space. For example, the Apollo 13 movie shows us very well that everything is being stage managed in Houston. Decisions are being made at a very micro level. Those astronauts are being told what to do constantly, right? And the temporary governance of that command module is able to be done with direct connection to Houston. That's not going to be possible in a more permanent settlement position. So again, it requires the local. Okay. I mentioned that we were going to pull some organizational theory, and this is going to help provide reasons why we have to think of governance architectures in a certain way. This framework comes from Albert Hirschman, writing in the 1970s, uh, and the book is Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, and it's about issues and decision making in any organization, right? In any organization, he's actually thinking in terms of trade unions and other things like that, and as well as governments. And he says for any issue set, um, a member of the population inside that organization has three choices. The first choice is exit, because the issue matters, doesn't like what the decision is going to be. You're going to leave the organization, go somewhere else, right? You could have voice instead, where the issue is important to you, you have an opinion, you're going to influence the outcome, so you're going to speak up, and you may cause tensions and frictions. And then there's loyalty. You don't care about the issue, or you agree with the decision. You're just not going to do anything about it, right? And you can be loyal and you'll keep your head down. This can be applied at the level of regime, in which democracy emphasizes voice. When a population is discontent, you hold an election. It might be fierce, it might be competitive, you might be having very, very, very deep, hostile, polarized fights over it. And that's how democracy is structured, right? It emphasizes voice. Voting in an election is exercising voice, right? Saying, I side on this side, I side on that side, I want this, I want that. Another option in the world, right, where we live on Earth is exit, right? You can leave the country, or you can leave the state, or you can leave your town if you don't like the way it's going. And then loyalty, of course, is sort of our generic third option. But this is a nice way to very quickly capture some of the major means by which individual residents, individual settlers are going to be dealing with organizational issues. Okay, so exit, voice, and loyalty uh, helps us understand why democracy is going to be extremely hard in space for the time being. Maybe not forever, but for the time being. Reason one is something that's very, very clear. Exit is practically impossible in a space environment, right? You can't go back, you can't exit the colony, you have finite rations in terms of food, you have finite rations, you have a finite amount of air, water, and so on. It's an extremely hostile environment, right? You can't exit, practically speaking. And as I mentioned, democracy is a system of governance that mechanically emphasizes voice through regular elections. Direct democracy, Elon Musk's favorite idea of Mars, is even more voice oriented, where everyone is opining at all times on all major issues, right? And a majority vote carries. Voice is always socially costly, right? Democracies are messy. Democracies are face disjunctures. They face problems. People get very, very upset, especially if you're on the losing side of an argument or losing side of a debate. That's how the system works. It's designed that way, and it's designed that way precisely because we value voice so much, right? But voice polarization, hyperpolarization, partisanship, if you'd like, can spiral dangerously. Even if your intentions are the best, by even engaging in that process, you can cause reaction and counter reaction that can lead to a great deal of tension within the community, right? Uh, for those reasons, democracy is difficult to justify in such a harsh, restrictive environment, at least the way we understand it, either from the electoral or from the direct side of things. Again, insofar as technology still constrains us. And of course, from the very get-go, we also have to understand that democracy is not an option in mission command style organizations from the get-go, right? The space missions are not organized democratically. They're organized hierarchically in the way that a military mission is organized hierarchically. This is also the case in terms of forward deployments in the military. This is the case in how sort of Antarctic bases work, and they still have strong touch points with national communities and so on. So for all these reasons, democracy is probably not the primary game in town for permanent space settlement in the medium term as populations get larger and larger. So to wrap up this thought experiment, that's very quickly going to become a reality for those chosen to be in space, is if not democracy, if direct democracy is likely a dead end, and I think it is, and if I was advising Elon Musk, I would be very interested in his ideas of how that would be achieved in these colonies in the first and second generations. But let's be productive and let's put on our authoritarian hats and think about the ways we could organize sustained settlement that's likely to be most stable, relatively speaking. This is why I said this was going to be a spicy and provocative lecture, because I'm going to tell you three potential authoritarian formats that might work in permanent space settlement over the long term. Okay, so what is possible? We want to use analogies. I couldn't help myself. I threw up a science fiction naval officer with, you know, tubes running out of his head. I think that one's from the Warhammer universe. But okay, so if democracy is impossible, what is possible? Our analogies do exist, and we can think analogically to try to get at what is ultimately a speculative question. So first, we can think about contemporary mission crewed expeditions that I'd mentioned before in the Antarctic, forward deployed bases, military installations, which are all organized hierarchically. Second, we can think in terms of early modern trade companies, right, which are creating ventures. The East India Company is one critical example. That analogy is nice because of the communication distances. The analogy breaks down, of course, because they're on in territories that are previously occupied by other people, right? So we don't want to go fully on that, but it's still instructive. And because of the closed nature of these settlement systems, we can think in terms of guilds or corporatism that coordinate high-scale specialists, because the populations on these settlements are going to be very atypical, right? They're going to be very smart, very skilled, high IQ, high education, engineers, scientists, and so on. And so we might think about how those types of people are organized socially in the past and have been. So I'll present three. Our final assumptions for this exercise is that the settlement population is too large to remain as a traditional mission crew, right? These are long-term societies. They're going to be reasonably self-sustaining and with a minimal expected chance for return to Earth. If some massive technological breakthrough changes that calculation, then this eases up. Um, but we won't assume that. Second, we'll assume that yes, indeed, as I've asserted before, we're going to require on-location decision making and social organization that's relatively um, flexible and doesn't require constantly going back to Starbase, constantly going back to Houston. And you can't rely on a model of franchised rule from Earth, right? That let's say the President of the United States is making decisions for you. That's not going to happen. And we'll finally assume that the settlement venture is going to be limited to major nation state powers, right? The great powers of today, the US, China, India, Russia, and so on. A supranational entity like the European Union, or oligarchic corporate entities like SpaceX or Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' project, or things like that. I put this in because if you read lots of good science fiction, there are often other reasons for space colonization in these stories, such as religious reasons or ideological reasons. If you've watched The Expanse, there's a whole plot line about Mormon colonization and giant Mormon spaceships and so on. And we're going to assume for this medium term scenario that the costs are too great, the investment is too much for that to take place, because that would also change. Ideology can fundamentally change your governance model as well, and can force things and make things work that otherwise wouldn't. But we're going to bracket that aside. So we're thinking in terms of either nation states or especially corporations that are establishing these venture colonies. Okay. So there's three models, as I said. The first is the closest to the crewed mission format. This is what we might call a militarized authoritarianism. It's taking some cues from military regimes today. This is a strict organizational hierarchy that mostly doesn't diverge from a crew-style format. Everyone has a role, everyone has a rank, everyone has a clear, direct line of authority, a chain of command. There's top-down obedience, right? If you have a military background, you know how this works. Exactly. Again, this is very common in military organizations. Decision making is concentrated in an apex figure, a captain or something like that, a commander. And the hierarchy will be formally delimited, right? Therefore, decision making is going to be limited to a very small group of people in the settlement, and all other roles, all other actors, all other people would fit within a pyramidal subordinate organizational complex, right? So this is analogous to contemporary mission crews, forms of military government. Uh, the Starship Enterprise is, in fact, a form of this. If the Enterprise was a permanent settlement that was going to be flying around the stars forever, its organizational structure is this, right? I mean, where we have a very, very clear hierarchy, an authority, a chain of command. The problem with this model, if we were to impose it on space settlements, is that it denies voice entirely, right? I mean, whatever the commanding officer says goes, and that's it, and that's the nature of the chain of command. It might lack societal legitimacy, especially as that colonization society gets larger and larger and more complex, where it's less clear you can all fit in a single chain of command, a single hierarchy in this style. And it's harder to function at scale, right? It's actually very, very difficult at a certain point to organize an entire society this way and to make sure that people actually obey you. Because at some point, people will ask, well, why are you in charge, right? Who named you, and why do I have the sort of military deference? Okay, so that's one model of permanent settlement organization. A second model, this is going to take more from the East India trading companies from medieval republics, as well as what we can call the exclusive oligarchy, right? The decision making in the colony, in this permanent long-term space settlement, is going to be coordinated around a small set of elites who will be key officers, working together organized formally as sort of a council or a board of directors. You can think about corporate governance this way. That's often how corporations are run. And there might be a single person at the top, nominally in charge, like a CEO, but there's in fact a board that are functionally differentiated. They are in control of certain aspects of the colony. And decision making in this format is going to come through consensus or on certain issues, maybe majoritarian decision making, and it's going to be confined to this council style body, board style body, right? Again, you'll notice that there's really no place for the population in the broader system. But this at least has the benefit of mapping onto many existing corporate structures in some ways. The problems, of course, is this also mostly denies voice, relatively speaking, and it's also going to make decision making more complicated. As you can imagine, corporations are not always lean creatures, and C-suite level issues can be very painful sometimes. Okay, so that's our second plausible model. Again, relying on oligarchic authoritarian structures that have existed in the human past for long periods of time. And the third is what we can call vocational corporatism. This is where organizational structure in the settlement is such that you, as a settler, are going to be placed in a given vocation or a given sort of issue area, right? The engineers are going to be in one group, the scientists are going to be in another group, there's facilities are going to be another group, and you're going to organize the structure and the governance model based on essentially a set of guilds, right, representing distinct groups of people who do distinct things in this colonial society. We call this corporatism today. The analogy is to medieval guilds as well. The New Deal thought very highly about corporatist structures and tried to implement some of them. And one reason why this is perhaps a compelling organizational choice is that you were selecting from a population that's used to democracy, right? They're Americans or they're Europeans in many cases, and they're elites, right? Again, highly educated, high IQ, highly motivated. They come from high wealth backgrounds, or they come from a variety of positions of privilege. I mean that entirely neutrally, right? To be specialists for the first and second generation and third generations of space colonization, they're going to expect a degree of voice. One way to control voice is to organize it almost through a union, right? You can also think of trade unions as a kind of corporate vocational organization, right? Sort of being able to move interests and discontents from a body, from a vocational body, up to the top and having it represented at the top. So this would be the division of colonial society into constituent groups based on professional or social role. Like I said, analogous to mandatory unions today, guild structures. Certain authoritarian party systems also have this. The Soviet Union had some version of this. Communist Party in China, in some ways, has some organizational components. To this, East Germany did as well. Fascist Italy also experimented with this, as well as other interwar era regimes. Now, of course, the problems with the articulation of interest through these managed, vertically integrated bands, these guild structures in a community of hundreds and thousands of people, it might even allow for potentially too much voice. That there might still be too much potential discontent expressed in the decision-making structure at the top as these interests are articulated upwards. It's going to bureaucratize colonial society and will slow down decision making. So sort of depending on where you are in the size of the colony or the complexity of that colonial society, it might make this more burdensome. But it does solve to some degree the problem of voice. All right. There's a table in the paper where you can look at it later. I won't bore you with this, but this is the more sort of specified explanation. And I wanted to leave you with those three potential options that are at least plausible. They fit historical patterns. They fit existing formats of real governance, and how authority is channeled upwards and downwards, or authority is channeled downwards, legitimacy is channeled upwards. And finally, they simply match the ecosystem, this very constrained ecosystem, much better than the tensions and problems inherent in democratic deliberation under highly precarious conditions, environmental conditions, at least for the time being. Again, in the medium term, we would all like to think that down the road, these space authoritarian settlements can democratize, perhaps when they've terraformed Mars and made it easier. Or otherwise, if travel to Earth is suddenly much, much, much simpler. So three policy implications. Because I work in the NatSec space, they ask us for implications in addition to just sort of academic thinking. So first is that real settlement programs, and if you are working at SpaceX, please talk to me. Settlement programs must think through how organizational forms of initial crewed missions will replicate on the ground or will transform and change over time, right? There's the case to be made that you could have that militarized authoritarian model for some time, for the first generation or so. But as the society gets more complex, that'll be more difficult. And it's better to think through that, to have planning, than to assume direct democracy, assume it'll all work out. And secondly, settlement planners must balance voice and exit concerns with means of ensuring and organizing loyalty, right? So especially given the populations that will be living in these societies, this balance, this framework is very, very useful to sort of think through as these societies become normal and become staid. They will also develop problems and potential dysfunctions at the social level, the sociological level. So again, you have to think in terms of governance long term. And it's even more important if either corporate sponsors of colonial ventures or government sponsors of colonial ventures, say in advanced Western democracies, aren't going to stomach the highly militarized sort of hierarchical model, right? We just might not want to see that, or we might not understand it. And finally, we can't assume at the end of the day that terrestrial forms of governance favored by you and me living in an advanced democracy, whether these will replicate easily or at all in extraterrestrial contexts. And so that is what I wanted to share with you all today. I think that's sufficient food for thought. You're welcome to read the paper, and you're welcome to get in touch with me otherwise, but I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions. Food for thought.
Yeah, maybe I could
Oh, I want to
start with the.
invite everybody to unmute. But Bill, I'm very happy for you to chime in
Sure.
first with Michael Deneen, who's raised his hand as well. I also want
Right.
to, there's been a lot of chatting
Oh, I haven't
And
been looking at the chats at all. So you're welcome
and
to re-ask it
that will
in the forum.
I will make sure that I include a link to the chats in the recording. Okay, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Yeah, I think you've made a good case. I think you're right that you can't have like an electoral democracy in the short, even medium term for a space settlement. But the big advantage of an electoral democracy is if the electorate really understand very well that the leader and his party are incompetent, they can be removed by voting,
Mhm.
right? The problem with authoritarianism, I'm not sure what happens if you have someone in charge or some regime in charge which is incompetent and even dangerous. I mean, they may not start that way, but over time they could evolve to become that way. So how do you replace them?
It's a fabulous question. And what I wouldn't want to say is that, authoritarianism is this idyllic system, actually, and it works incredibly well, right? There are reasons why the advanced democracies of the world are indeed advanced and why our systems have lasted quite successfully. The question is more whether or not the tensions inherent in the mechanics of democracy can be even allowed in this context, at least again in that short to medium term. When it comes to the problem of succession, in an authoritarian regime or getting a bad leader, right? Or getting a bad group of leaders. That's very, very, very difficult. And that would be an entire other paper, actually, of trying to deal with the fact that leadership quality matters greatly. Now, in very successful authoritarian regimes, there are mechanisms for succession and mechanisms for oversight. The most successful modern authoritarian regimes are absolute monarchies, where the succession mechanism is solved by your son inherits, right? So there's a very, very easy line through. And the royals are often able to choose competent people as their prime ministers or viziers or what have you, right? That's one way that you have very long-standing regimes. The other way is the party model, both the party state version, which we found in the Soviet Union and in China today or in Vietnam, where the party itself is an organization that's tightly coherent, that is trying to select, if not fully based on merit, but at least based on mission orientation for people who can be good party members, who can achieve their KPIs, right? They can achieve their production rates, they can achieve their goals, and they rise up in this bureaucracy so that by the time they're at the top, they should have a lot of accumulated skill in being able to deal with the organization. Now that can fail too, and it has in the past. But that's another way that successful authoritarian regimes have managed that. And party regimes are nice because they often build in um, essentially elite replacement times. In the Russian, they called it sort of rotation of cadres. In the Chinese system, there used to be a term limit, a de facto term limit on how long you could be general secretary of the Communist Party. Xi Jinping has broken that now, and actually the Chinese regime has gotten less party-based and more personalist, which is actually a sign that the governance format in China is weakening. But that's a sort of a long answer. There are ways organizationally that you do that. The way in which you might get the most oversight in these sort of situations would be probably the corporatist model, where you have regular injections of opinions from groups that are explicitly articulated upwards. And at a certain point, if everyone is dissatisfied, um, it's possible you end up having a coup or the leadership realizes it has to resign. Now, the other complication is that any colonial venture like this may still have a nominal connection to the corporate sender, right, or the nation state sender, and they might reserve the right to change the leadership. That's again very difficult given the travel times. But in principle, if things go off the rails in the Mars colony, SpaceX presumably thinks it could change the leadership. Uh,
It's just that competence, is really important in these settlements, especially in the early stages. Yeah.
yes, that's exactly right. And I mean, competence fails regularly in all political regimes. We see it every day, whether or not they're elected. But anyway, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's a great question, and there is no firm solution.
All right. Thanks.
All right, Michael Deneen is next.
Yeah, hi, Julian. Great talk. I was wondering if I could question um, your assumptions and your thoughts on the interplay of economic class. Now, you seem to be talking about the initial homogeneity because they're highly educated explorers, but Ellis Island is floating back there somewhere.
Mhm.
And that has to have some kind of a torquing on these models.
That's a fabulous question, and that the question is, when do you get the technology level and the investment level and the infrastructure level where you are not having just specialists make up your population, right? At what point do you have just general workers? At what point do you start mining ventures and you just need lots of bodies to do the mining and to drive the trucks, the space trucks, and things like that? Many things can be automated. Eventually, your society is going to become so big, as you say, that it's going to be class differentiated, economically modeled in that way. And the question is, when does that happen? Does that happen in 2050? Does it happen in 2070? Is it more like 2100, 2150? We can't answer that well, because the real question is, how quick is the trajectory pick off? If Elon is successful and we get the first manned colonial settlement of a few people in the early 2030s, what is the rate of expansion on that? Is it exponential? In the way that Starlink has been, it's an incredible network that's developed very, very rapidly all of a sudden, or is this going to be a slower trickle? That's part of the answer. Is just it's a question of timing. But if we take it as an assumption that we're going to get there, and I think that's right. If these are successful, if we truly can go beyond Earth, then we're going to get that. You're going to very likely see that kind of social organization articulated also through guild-like structures that represent workers essentially, right? Again, the analogy to a trade union is not that difficult, especially a trade union functioning on a non-American or non-British model. The trade union functioning more along the continental German or Nordic models, which are highly coordinated. In fact, these are traditionally called coordinated market economies, where a trade union represents the employees in a given industry, right, at the level of the whole industry, and they en masse negotiate with the entire corporate governance structure, right, the owners of this, and that negotiation takes place in the confines of the government, acting as a third party mediator between the two. It's a very controlled system. The sneaky answer, which nobody wants to tell you, is it's actually derived from the interwar fascist experience, this corporatist experience of coordinating society as opposed to having adversarial relations, right? So the Anglo-American model is labor unions fight employers, right? And it's very, very contested. The continental model is they work with them, and the government arranges and regulates such that they're working with them, and they're sort of organically arranged. Is sort of the idea. So that's sort of
Well,
the long answer. But yes, I mean, I think that third model that I presented is the best fit as the population gets larger and larger. When dealing with that, is you have the interests of low skilled workers, settlers, or eventually once you have families, people who aren't working necessarily, right? You're going to have what we saw in corporate societies in the past. Interest groups for mothers, interest groups for children, and interest groups for parents generally, right? This is also going to have to somehow articulate up to the decision makers at the top.
well, if we could leave the destination and go to the source for just 20 seconds here, and I'll get out of the way.
No, it's great.
There's great science fiction about indentured labor mining asteroids.
Mhm.
And it was just poor people migrating to America and migrating everywhere. It wasn't the wealthy that had that sort of impact.
Mhm.
So, what if it works out that way with space? Um, what's Elon's impact going to be on who lines up and what the deal could possibly be to get them to Mars or the asteroids?
It's a fabulous question. I mean, this is where science fiction writers often talk about feudalism or neo-feudalism in space, right?
Yeah.
Where the indentured workers Again, the expanse comes to mind as sorts. Oftentimes, it's discussed in terms of a contract that if you fulfill the terms, you become a millionaire, right? Or you become a billionaire because you get 0.0001% of the rare earth that's mined on this asteroid. And if you do your 25 years, it's the equivalent of being a Roman legionary in the first century. You fight for 25 years against the barbarians. If you survive, you get a plot of farmland in a nice area inside the empire. They're literally called colonies. This is where the city of Cologne in Germany actually comes from, as a military colony of Roman legionaries who successfully served out their term and then settled there. So again, that's a little bit to the side, but these sorts of models are very possible. So I think if we do have a situation where roboticization isn't able to replace truly large masses of low-skilled workers, and I think you're probably going to get somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be Ellis Island style, hundreds of thousands entering the mines in Pennsylvania in 1 year. It's going to be smaller numbers, and it'll probably not be truly the poorest, because again, the investment of getting to Mars, getting to the moon is still quite high. But you absolutely 100% are going to see um, very, very strict contracts, often with sweeteners at the very end, right, of the term,
Right.
especially dealing with the constraint in the environment and the expectation that you don't rock the boat. Um, so, yeah, it's a fabulous question.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to Phil Youngblood.
Whose first question is, how long do you usually go on here? So I know.
Oh, we go to 8:15.
Okay, just didn't want to go over what you normally do. My primary observation was essentially about evolution of the mission. In
Mhm.
other words, you can't have a non-ambiguous decision-making body who's trying to like avoid an
Mhm.
asteroid. Okay. In
Mhm.
other words, when as they're getting toward the planet, there needs to be somebody in charge who the ground and everyone else knows who's in charge, and then other people who are taking instructions from them, much like a military command. Okay, once they get to the planet, then I'm not sure how they would transition from a military command structure to a democracy. Perhaps it's like, okay, hi, I got you here, and I'll step down now, and that sort of thing. Or it could be like in Don't Look Up, and the president of the United States gets eaten by a dinosaur. I don't know, but yeah. So I'm not quite sure. But then it also depends on the mission. If they're like in one of the commands or one of the comments I put, if they're research oriented, it might be less hierarchical because they're used to working with each other and stuff like that. If it's purely commercial, then obviously there'd be somebody that goes, do this, do that, because we need to do this to make money.
Mhm.
Um, the other comment I mentioned, and I'll just keep this short here, is the last one I basically said is not to look at Hollywood movies as an example of governance. Because, like, for example, I love Star Trek, okay, because I'm retired military, and that to me looks like the way it might work.
Mhm.
But and also they can't, whatever the people that you've never seen every episode are the ones that get killed, okay? The ones in the red shirts, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, but the idea is that some of the movies look like they just took real people off the streets, threw them into the spaceship, and it's like, and they go nuts when things get a little bit strange, and they go after each other. It's like,
Mhm.
no. Okay, so in other words, they probably have to be vetted to be able to work and live in space as teams before they threw them into this billion-dollar spacecraft to go to Mars.
Mhm.
Okay, those are my primary
That
observations.
those are all great. I agree with all of them. What I will say is that it's funny. It's got an implicit in three models. Excuse me. That I sort of speculated on presented is that it's very likely the first generation is going to look very mission crude because even the initial construction of a settlement is going to be very, very, very require a lot of like detailed control, right? And you're going to have one person making those decisions. Like even just think about the construction super on a construction site, who is maybe interfacing with the architect or maybe interfacing with the funder, the client, but it's really just a few people who are making all the decisions, right? So you're going to have that for that first generation, and it because these societies, we can barely call them societies. There'll be 5, 10, 15 people, right? Very small. Everyone will know each other. Everyone will be highly vetted. They'll have multi-year training protocols. Everything like this, it always involves like 6 month stint in Antarctica on a base to see if you can mentally handle it, emotionally handle it. You have to go through psychiatric screenings and evaluations, right? We expect the first generation, probably the second, to be very, very, very heavily controlled that way, right? And selected and vetted. And the expectation, though, is if this is successful, it will get less so. And to the point made earlier, as you move from the tens to the hundreds and the thousands, society will look a little bit more like society. It'll still be very, very skewed, but yes, that's exactly right. Those are all great points. Sorry, I don't want to take up more time. If there
Okay.
are more questions.
We have Charlotte. Please unmute to ask your question.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. I'm a sci-fi filmmaker, so this was really, really interesting. Thank you for all the information. I was wondering which sci-fi film you think is most likely like the future that you think will occur.
For the medium term stretch,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one that feels most plausible in certain ways is The Expanse. And I
Okay.
think the two authors wrote it that way to at least be semi-plausible. I think some of the social dynamics in the belt don't make much sense, but some of the broader sort of sociological aspects of it do. And I think that series very well captures the idea of the utterly hostile environment on the outside, which does really condition decision making. It conditions what people can do, and it limits them in very certain ways. They're very, very, very bound to systems, and they're very, very bound to choices made by others, which again provides this constraint environment. A lot of the other sci-fi that I love, it's far too far out.
Mhm.
The technology assumptions are
Mm,
far greater, I think. I will say, and I didn't put it in this lecture. I have a small sort of Substack blog newsletter where I looked at putting on my authoritarianism hat, looked at government models in science fiction and fantasy, and sort of
mhm,
how it's portrayed. Because obviously, speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, it's often written. There's the hard science fiction, the crunchy side of things, for example, but it's often written to discuss social issues, right? Or questions that the author is interested in, and this is sort of a wrapping through which you can relax the assumptions of modern life, right? What's
mhm,
interesting is that when science fiction authors do this in space contexts, usually more technologically advanced, they often land on authoritarian regimes, right?
Mhm.
When you
yeah.
read your pulp science fiction, you read your Foundation, you read your whatever, you're reading about the God Emperor of mankind, you're reading about the kings, you're reading about tyrants, you're reading about military leaders,
Mhm.
and whenever it's democracy, it's usually hand waved a little bit. So I'll give you the Expanse example because again that's more realistic. The government on Earth, if you're familiar with the story, is the United Nations. There's not really a very, very good sense that this is a democratic regime at this point in time. It feels much more like
Mhm.
a technocratic uh, kind of.
I haven't seen The Expanse, so
Okay, yeah, well, I
yeah.
recommend it. It's sort of a
Yeah.
technocratic, bureaucratic, authoritarian
Mhm,
regime with severe population controls. Everyone is on the dole, the welfare state. It's sort of this kind of dystopia. And
mhm,
then it's compared to a successful terraforming project on Mars. So if everything that I just said goes super well, Mars becomes this big, large-scale human society
mhm,
where the air will be breathable, and they're making work. And Mars is portrayed as a republic, a democracy, and the Martian Congress rules everything.
mhm,
But if you actually read what the authors write when they talk about this society, it is highly ideological. It is essentially a party state moving forward. We are moving forward with almost religious imperative to colonize Mars, to separate ourselves from Earth, and all of that. So it's unclear if this is actually democracy as I described it earlier. So anyway,
mhm.
that's a lot of words. I'm happy to send you the blog. It's just some thoughts
That
on
would
it.
be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Just shoot me an email.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
Why don't you put your email in your chat in the chat?
Sure, yeah.
That's the right thing to do. I think I'm going to close with this last comment. Where did it go? By Bill Wall. Will the leader even be living? Maybe an AI authority.
That's a fun one. That's a fun one. There's a lot of sci-fi that does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I can't answer that because that
No.
goes beyond the our observed empirical data that we have, right?
Right.
We don't have an instance of it, so we can't extrapolate based off of it. Call me skeptical for now, not least because of the legitimacy problems of relying on an AI to tell you what to do in your life in a society like this, whether or not you trust it and whether or
Mm.
not, say, one mistake or one thing you disagree with, and you're talking to an AI or the AI is just ruling over you, could very easily be a disaster very quickly.
Mhm.
And no regime lasts forever, so maybe that's just the case. We will get AI regimes, but that's not the final answer.
Right. And lastly, I want to note that the next Earth and Space report will be by Phil Youngblood. And so what's the next month? September. And he will be, uh, why don't you just give a quick summary of what you're going to be talking about, Phil?
Well, this is a perfect lead in because essentially in our group, William down there, otherwise known as Sis and Phoenix over up, we all meet and we have been for the last 3 years to talk about how do you live and work sustainably on the moon. And we've been looking at everything from very detailed physiological needs and stuff to the idea of how do you do cultural expression? What colors do you use because of cultural things like that, that sort of thing. And so I will ask you to kind of paradigm shift because I'm going to give you a little tour of what we've actually been doing in the virtual world in two different places. One that we're working up for the World Space Week event in October, and another that we did for Virtual World's Best Practices Education back in April, May time period. So I'm going to give you a tour in the virtual world that actually is on the moon and show you different designs of moon bases and what the types of thinking we're doing on that subject, on how do you live and work sustainably on the moon. So this is a perfect lead into that.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. It was serendipity that it happened that way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the paradigm shifts essentially is in our group, we do a lot of chat and talking. And so essentially, instead of a presentation, it's more facilitation. I hope that everybody will become involved and ask questions as we go and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of a paradigm shift from what you're
Yeah.
used to here.
Yeah.
That's great.
This
But it'll be
old-fashioned
fun.
thing.
Yeah, be fun.
Sounds good.
Little more
And
democracy.
Julian, thank you
Try it
so
out.
much. My number one son, well, he's my only son. Uh, that was a real treat, and I hope we're getting hearts from Pam Markham, who I think knew you at least when you were inside Sandy. Uh, so it's very delightful. Okay, I think it's time to call it quits. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank
Thank you,
you, Bill,
everyone.
Thank
and
you.
thank
That
you,
was
Julian.
great.
This was wonderful. Thank you
Yep,
so
I'm
much.
happy to be in touch and happy to send the slides. Just shoot me an email if you want them.
Thanks for the
Okay.
nightmares.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thanks for
It's my job.
that.